Members of the military began to speak out, and including many in the reserves, including Air Force pilots in the reserves who said they were not going to show up for training anymore in protest of this overhaul. This really started to reach a point where it was very difficult for the government to ignore, to move forward, culminating, of course, last night with the defense minister coming out in opposition to this proposed overhaul, saying that it is undermining Israel's security, and then just hours later, Prime Minister Netanyahu firing him summarily in a one-sentence statement. That seems to have really triggered this more intense round of protests, strikes across the country that are really freezing major swaths of Israel's economy. I just spoke with an Israeli official who told me that the Israeli diplomatic corps is now on strike. The Israeli embassy in the U.S. and in other countries closed today. No consular services being provided. And so we are waiting now to see whether Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to address this and whether he may start to walk this back.
Definitely something to watch for. And Dove, wanted to get back to you. Just how fragile is this far-right coalition government? And could a potential U-turn on this judicial overhaul, could it bring it down?
That's the main question of the day. I think most people expect Prime Minister Netanyahu to put a pause on this legislation. But the main question now, and what's happening behind closed doors, is what's going to happen to his coalition security minister in the coalition. And very pro this reform. He put out statements this morning that he doesn't want it to stop. So I think that's the main question of the day is, if Netanyahu does pause this legislation, will his coalition survive? And I'm sure that's the question on the top of Mr. Netanyahu's mind right now.
Precarious situation there. Josh, wanted to ask you this as well. What's the reaction from the U.S. been like? A close ally, obviously, to Israel. What's the response been?
Well, throughout the last several weeks, the U.S. government has really tried to walk a fine line on this. They have talked. President Biden had a call with Netanyahu, put out a statement afterwards talking about the need to support Israel's democracy and its democratic institutions like the judiciary, but they didn't want to outright criticize Israel. That seems to have changed last night after the firing of the defense minister, with the White House National Security Council spokeswoman putting out a very critical statement overnight saying the U.S. is deeply concerned by what they're seeing in Israel, urging a restoration of peace and calm there. So we're seeing the U.S. start to be much more outspoken in its critique of what they're seeing in Israel.
The video we're seeing of these protests are just a massive number of people. Josh, Dove, thank you both so much.
Now to the latest on the New York grand jury investigation into former President Donald Trump. Jurors are expected to reconvene today, but it's unclear on when they could vote on a possible indictment. Trump criticized the investigation during his first campaign rally over the weekend in Waco, Texas. NBC's Garrett Hake joins us now from outside the Manhattan DA's office here in New York with the latest. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Zinkle, good morning. The DA has just arrived back at his office this morning, and anticipation here is really only growing that this could be the week we learn if this grand jury is going to make an historic decision to indict a former president. That former president spent his weekend escalating his attacks against the justice system he said is unfairly targeting him. On a Waco, Texas rally stage, Donald Trump lashing out this weekend at the Democratic district attorney developing a criminal case against him in New York City.
The innocence of people makes no difference whatsoever to these radical left maniacs.
Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg has been presenting evidence to a Manhattan grand jury for nearly 2 months. Expected to reconvene today, the grand jurors could soon decide if there's enough evidence to charge the former president with any crimes related to 2016 hush money payments facilitated by his former fixer turned critic Michael Cohen to Stormy Daniels, an adult film star who claims she had an affair with Mr. Trump a decade prior. Mr. Trump denies any affair took place. His attorney denies any crime was committed.
This was a personal civil settlement that's done every day in New York City.
The former president telling NBC News over the weekend he's not frustrated by the investigation.
I just did a speech for 2 hours. I'm not frustrated by anything. It's a fake investigation.